What can I say about Dokimon Quest? Well, it's a creature collector that looks like it's heavily inspired by the retro Pokemon games. And that's kinda what it is. Dokimon Quest was developed by Yanako RPGs. This is a solo dev endeavor, which is already impressive, but this goes even further once you realize that Yanako built their own engine called Mome, an engine built specifically for Monster Tamer games. So the game launched in late November of last year, and I played through it within about the release week. And I kind of want to talk about it, so here we are, I guess.
Beautiful.
Starting with the good, Dokimon Quest looks amazing. As I've stated previously on this channel, I have an affinity for pixel art in video games. Is it because I'm old? Is it because pixel art is the only form of art I'm remotely competent in? Well, it's a little bit of both, to be honest with you. Either way, the art in Dokimon Quest is superb. The overworld tiles and sprites have a clear inspiration from the classic Pokemon games, but the dev went beyond the scope of what Pokemon offers in terms of tile variety. This is most noticeable in the architecture. Until the third generation of Pokemon, most buildings looked very simple as well as copy and pasted. Dokimon definitely repeats the use of buildings, but all of the buildings provide a lot more personality than even the third generation of Pokemon offered. The sprites, on the other hand, are very simplistic, rarely if ever using more than 4 colors. The main draw to any creature collector is the creatures in which you will be collecting. Dokimon Quest has 144 monsters, which is pretty impressive. The monster designs are a mixed bag, as is common with all creature collectors. This is Bundust, and it is the objectively worst designed Dokimon in the game. Luckily, for every Bundust, there are 4 more designs like Tignis, Herate, Punchbox, and Spud. There is an abundance of background art for the battle scenes. All of these look amazing. Additionally, since the game has a day-night cycle, a lot of these have variations. Upon all of that is the option to completely alter the palette to 26 different styles. This affects both the overworld and battle screens. It's not a feature that I used, but it's still a cool option to see. All that said, if there is anything Dokimon Quest does better than most other Pokemon-inspired games, it's the pixel art. The music of Dokimon Quest is decent as well. The 8-bit chiptunes are fitting given the graphical style of the game. There is an option to use piano music instead of the previously mentioned chiptunes. But I didn't use these myself, as I felt that the piano music and 8-bit sound bites clashed. That said, it's definitely an option. Okie dokie, man. Time to move into the middling of the game.
Oh, wow!
I'm gonna gloss over the story segment, because there really isn't much for me to discuss without getting too deep into it. I will say that the story is interesting for what it is, but the pacing leaves much to be desired. You probably noticed that the gameplay wasn't in the good section of this review. Well, this is exactly why. I played through the entirety of the game with no understanding of the strength and weakness system. I just assumed if it works for Pokemon, it will work for Dokimon, and for the most part, that's how it played out. And even when that wasn't the case, I somehow managed to brute force my way through fights. At the end of the game, I was facing off against enemies that were 15 to 20 levels higher than myself, and winning. This wasn't because I'm some sort of expert Dokimon player. Quite the opposite, in fact. You see, when I play through any sort of like a creature collector game, or hell, even any JRPG or any shooter, I don't care about cohesion in my team or optimization of my party. I just go with rule of cool. And Dokimon Quest is no different. In fact, I couldn't optimize even if I wanted to, since leveling up takes a long time and the XP share mechanic isn't really explained too well. This made changing my Dokimon a huge pain in the ass, so whenever I did, I had to grind the character to a decent level. This isn't that bad, but then once you calculate how long a single battle takes, even when sped up, it becomes a chore. There's also an affinity point system within the game that lets players somewhat adjust the stats of Dokimon by boosting their affinity. This is a system that's really not mentioned too much in the game, and it's not explained very well. It's like mentioned once on a sign, and it's not really gone into too much. A lot of important information isn't relayed to the player. I think at one point I may have sequence broke the game. There's this whole area, I don't think I've ever seen it. Is this an optional area? A post-game zone? I have no idea. Maybe I did see it and I don't remember because the pacing of this game is ludicrous. There were way too many times after a story event where I was teleported to a completely new area, and sometimes locked into that area until I completed an objective. That didn't feel great. One of the most appealing things about early Pokemon games was the traveling aspect. Each route felt like a trek. Each cave or forest felt like a journey. Keep in mind, one of the most appealing things about the early Pokemon games is that the entire world was connected. When you traveled from Pewter City, through Route 3, into Mount Moon, and then to Route 4, and finally arrive at Cerulean City, it's an accomplishment. Dokimon does have these on occasions, but there are so many instances where an NPC waltz up and teleports players halfway across the region. It doesn't feel earned. It also doesn't help that some of the areas suck. Which Way Caves exists, and it's legitimately one of the worst dungeons I've played in recent memory. To sum it up, it's a teleportation maze with cave entrances, so that doesn't even make sense. Then later in the game, they pull the same shit when you have to find a room in a hospital, which is kind of funny, but it's also annoying. Luckily, Which Way Caves is not that long, and the hospital is a no-encounter zone. Every other zone was, for the most part, fine. Dokimon Quest is like a hard-shell taco. After that first bite, the game starts to fall apart. And that brings us into the bad.
Oh no, it all went wrong!
The worst parts of Dokimon Quest become more prominent once double battles are introduced, and the battle UI actively starts to shit itself. Targeting stops working, enemy names and animations become mixed up, the guide that tells the player how effective an attack is completely breaks. Half the battles come down to hoping an attack does enough damage. Straight up, sometimes an attack will be super effective and then the next turn be completely useless. The weird design choices were not ideal, but they definitely weren't deal breakers. But when core parts of the battle system are so scuffed that it makes Phantasy Star 2's battle system look well made, you know there's a huge problem here. So, Dokimon Quest,
is a really interesting game that I would highly advise you to wait to check out.
During my playthrough, the dev pushed out a massive bug fix, but my game didn't seem to reflect any of those changes. Perhaps that's why the second half of my game proceeded to shit itself. I'd have to do a second playthrough of the game to test that theory, but I don't have time for that. I would advise waiting a few months before picking up this one, as the buggy nature of the game really dampens a potentially very fun creature collector. That said, there is another reason why I would wait to play this game. As it stands, parts of the game feel pretty incomplete. There's a battle tower we can't access, what seems to be a ranch that potentially has breeding mechanics. It's currently unavailable, among other things. These are intended to be added post-launch, as well as things like a new town, a pickaxe, and furniture for decorating your home.
I feel like waiting for this game is the best option because ideally the game will be less buggy with post-launch updates, as well as it will likely be more feature complete as time goes on. I'm done with this video. I'm going to bed now.